Good afternoon, everyone. Just to reiterate, my name is Arin Zara. I'm the assistant curator at NEMWA and one of the co-curators of Paper Roots, along with my colleague, Ginny Trainer. For those who are unfamiliar with the Women to Watch program, it is an exhibition series that began in 2008. We hold it every 2 to 3 years. We work very closely with our outreach committees. These are committees that are based in various regions across the US and also internationally. And these committees really help to bring forth our mission to champion women in the arts in their respective regions. So for Women to Watch, we work closely collaborating with these committees and also regional curators to nominate and select an artist who is working in a particular theme or subject that Ginny and I have chosen beforehand. And in the end, we have this big group exhibition that features work by each of those selected artists. So this time around, we have 22 participating committees. Therefore, we have 22 artists. It is the largest Women to Watch yet. And so we're really excited about the way this initiative has grown over the past decade or so. As you can guess by the title, Paper Roots, that the theme of this year is paper. And what Ginny and I were looking for specifically are artists who use paper as a primary medium. So not only for sketches or support for photographs or watercolors or drawings, but really transforming paper in creative and innovative ways. So I'm very excited to introduce today's featured artist, Sadia Rahman, who is representing the Ohio Committee. So first of all, a huge thank you to Sarah Benz-Waddell and Harriet Form and the Ohio Committee, as well as our consulting curators, Matt Distel and Emily Liebert from the Cleveland Museum of Art. If you're watching, thank you so much for all your support with us in this project. Your nominations of artists in your region were excellent. And of course, thank you for introducing us to Sadia's work. So as Ginny has been doing with our previous studio tours, I'm just going to briefly summarize, give some highlights of their extremely impressive resumes. So Sadia has exhibited her work nationally and internationally at venues such as the Kempler International Drawing Space, 12 Gates Gallery, Queens Museum, Brooklyn Museum, and the Pakistan National Council of the Arts in Islamabad, among other institutions. She was nominated for and a recipient of numerous prestigious grants and residencies, and featured in the New York Times, Washington Post, Harper's Magazine, among, again, other publications. Currently, Sadia is the 2020 to 2021 Center for Art and Social Engagement Fellow at the Columbus Museum of Art, a year-long prestigious fellowship, where she will be creating a wall drawing in one of their galleries, and that opens in September 2020. So Sadia's work really reflects on and contests and speaks to notions of race and gender and power structures in our society. The work that will be in Paper Roots is a hand-cut stencil, paper, that is 8 feet high, so 8 feet tall, and 17.5 feet wide. So it's enormous. It has an enormous presence. It's really impactful, and she has titled it Family. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sadia to delve into her work a little bit more for us. Sadia?
Hello, everyone. Let me just put this down here. Can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, so welcome to my studio. I'd like to first begin by thanking everyone, the committee and the museum, to include me in this exhibition. It's a really prestigious and such an honor to be amongst so many artists that are women and work with paper. And so I would like to thank you for that. And also, I've only been to DC a handful of times during my life, and every time I would pass by the museum, I'd say, I really want to be in that museum. So thank you so much for including me in the show. So I'd like to begin by just speaking about my exhibition, my solo exhibition at the Kentler International Drawing Space, which was up from the end of February to the end of March. Unfortunately, it had to close due to COVID. So I wanted to just share some images from that work, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about the work at the museum that hopefully you'll be able to see in October. And then I'll just take you around the space, which I realized is smaller than the work that's being shown at the museum. My space is about 5 by 10 feet. Okay, so let's look at those images, please, Carolyn. All right, so the works in this, so the title of the show is The Cost of Entry, and it's filled with large works on paper, similar to the one that you'll see at the museum titled Family 2017. And can we go to the next image? Along with medium-sized works, probably 16 by 20 inches. And then there were also smaller 2 by 2 passport size works on paper. And then in the far wall, you can see a remnant from a performance. So I'll talk to you about that at the end. We can go to the next image. So I think I put 3 images of these. So these images are approximately 16 by 20, and they are stencils, and they're on newsprint, and I've rubbed charcoal onto them. You can go to the next image. And so the imagery comes from family photos, and the exhibition focuses on surveillance. And so the themes that I usually look at in my work are under the umbrella of violence. And so a lot of, different types of violence can fit into that. And that can be, within the family structure, and then also outside of the family structure, such as surveillance. And so I've focused on government issued IDs. We can go to the next image. And I looked at family passport photos, and I cut them into stencils, and then we can go to the next image. So this is the performance, and along with family photographs, I also use mass media images that I've been collecting from newspapers and magazines, and also the internet, so printing them out. And the media images that I collect mostly show people of color and Black people, and so they are usually very, I guess, modern day Orientalist of how Black and brown bodies are supposed to look like, or they kind of like contain them in a box. So these are the images that are, so I curated images that have to do with surveillance and projected them directly on the wall. And then throughout the performance, I begin calling out numbers. So each participant or each viewer that comes into the gallery receives a passport, and their numbers are called out you can go to the next one. And so they draw with me. And here you can't even see me, but I'm up there drawing. I'm wearing a Tyvek suit. So while I'm drawing the images that are projected, and this is an image from a TSA scan that we all get at the airport. And so while the images are projected on the wall, and as I'm tracing them, I'm kind of camouflaged within the wall. I guess we can come back to me now. So the work in the museum that you'll be seeing, titled Family, was made in 2017, and it was actually one of my first large-scale stencils. At the time, the Muslim ban was quite new, and I was far away from my family. I was born in Queens, and the first time I had moved away in my adult life was from New York City, was moving to Columbus, Ohio to get my MFA at the Ohio State University. And so I was thinking about family, and so I just drew a large portrait of my family in a gathering, or gathered together. And the stencil comes in because at the time I was doing wall drawings, and I was thinking about other ways and techniques to kind of put the mark onto the wall. Not only hand drawing, but I wanted to see like what other ways there were. So I started cutting out stencils, and it kind of reflects back to my childhood in Queens, where I was surrounded by graffiti that was considered vandalism, but it was also beautiful. And so they're usually either spray painted, or graffiti artists use stencils. So I kind of was inspired by that, and also thinking about how a lot of times these artworks, public artworks, graffiti, are put on the wall and then erased, and who puts them up and who erases them. So I'm now going to, I guess I will give you a scan of my studio. I'm going to turn my camera, and again, it's a 5x10 studio. So here, just a 360 scan. Here are some images that I'm inspired by right now. This is my desk, and I'm going to talk about some of these things. I usually do all my cutting on the desk, but then I love, I'm a Cancer, so I create a nice space for myself. I like the home. So this is where I do all my drawing. It's just directly on the floor. And then very critical to have wall space. So I have that, and plants. And since it's such a small space, I kind of selected a few things to just put like essential materials that I need, like tape and charcoal, Q-tips for some reason, glue, and other things that I require for my work. So I'm gonna go here. So this is a kind of new work, kind of branching out from the Kentler show. So these are, I'm looking at this from above, and so these are 2x2 passport photos. And let me just show you, this is me, this is a passport photo. And so they're all cut out of photograph, or what do you call it, photo paper. And so some of them have like Kodak printed on the back of the papers. And so they are cut out of images of flowers and gardens and nature. And I have been in Columbus. I was supposed to go back and forth between New York and Columbus in the past few months, and I often do that. But I have been here since March, so I've been thinking about and also doing a lot of gardening. And so I've been thinking about the land a lot. And I also have been thinking about, Zoom meetings or like this collection of people in this way in passport photos. And yeah, so let's see, I'm gonna move this now because there's also more things underneath. Set this aside. Okay. And so I'm gonna just flip through some of my sketchbooks. And so I think about stencils a lot in that I like, I use this. This is the X-Acto knife that I use with lots of blades. And the other important tool that I have is the Sharpie, which I can get anywhere. And so I usually, draw. This is just a Xerox, and I've cut out of this brick building the camera. And so I look for imagery like this, surveillance imagery, again, imagery of violence. And I just begin cutting through these things and see like what kind of possibilities I can get or see through the stencils. This is kind of a drawing where I'm using another tool that I use is purchased stencils. Here, maybe we can see this one, purchased stencils. So I use these to make marks and, think about these as both structures and grids that can be broken, but also guidelines that you stay within and do not go astray. So I think about that a lot. This is just another sketch. And I kind of like do a lot of sketches. I draw every day and I just do them just to move my hand because it kind of jogs my memory. And then when I said that I look at, and I'm gonna just go to this influence area. When I say that I look at images of mihrabs or Islamic architecture or miniatures, the things that I look at here are kind of the borders here. So like very geometric borders, very symmetrical, and kind of look like they could be just stencils, but they're not. That's not how they're made. And then I also look at things like how the figures' faces are covered. And in Islamic art, it's usually thought that the figures are covered because only God is allowed to make the figure. But then, you see a lot of faces in Islamic art as well. So that is something that can be contested. But usually in my work, the figures are, the faces are not there. And so I think about that as like a possibility and expansion of sorts. And so it kind of like gives you or the viewer and myself an opportunity to kind of look at what's in the margins, like what are they wearing? And it speaks to also like family photographs, like what's not included. So going back to the influences and the inspiration, so Islamic art is a big influence. I then like go back into drawing mode and kind of pull imagery from the miniatures. So like, you know, perhaps I saw something that looked like this kind of mark making that was water, or this was a cloud. So I make those marks and then I tend to incorporate those in my wall drawings and stencils. And so, let's see, I will go to this wall here. Along with stencil imagery, I've also been doing a lot of drawing and inspired by miniatures and Islamic art. So I think about the border. This is all made of Sharpie. And so I make these drawings that are 8.5 by 11. And they are very detailed and kind of meditative, much like when I cut the stencils. And so I've been incorporating this into my larger body of work. And I'm just going to show you. Let's just turn this back to me. So I have a fellowship at the Columbus Museum of Art. It has begun. And so what I am doing there is that I'm looking at the Schiller collection, which is a collection of social commentary art, and then also looking at the Photo League collection, and that's made up of several photos made by mostly working class artists and from New York City during the 30s, 40s. So like Lewis Hines and Dorothy Lange. So I've been looking at those photos and images, and what I'm going to be doing at the museum is inspired by that, as well as imagery that I continue to meditate on. I'm going to be making a wall drawing, and the wall drawing will be it'll take on the aesthetic of the border. And so what I kind of do when I have big projects like this is I build a model. And so this is the model of the gallery. And so what we have here, it's, you know, kind of a square rectangular gallery. And so we have images from the collection on the wall here. This is just a standing wall that you can walk around. So my wall drawing will go on the kind of floor so that viewers can bend down and look at the images as they kneel to the ground. And then they will wrap around the doorway and then just go around the entire gallery space. And so how I've been doing that is that while I look at the collections, I have just been sketching out images some images from both mass media and also the collections. And so I have been using tracing paper, again, like something that you can see through, and have just been drawing, both hand drawing and tracing images that I've been just meditating on for quite some time. So you have images of, you know, women crying, you have images of war, images of drones, images of protest, and yeah, so I've just been looking at these and images of labor. And so the theme of the show at the CMA is justice. And then what I do is I draw I just draw like a panel. So the border will be made up of several panels that speak to the several justices. So for example, transformative justice, labor justice, LGBTQ justice. And so just thinking about those. And so I'm in the, right now I'm just drawing just imagery that I'm thinking about for the panels. This is a very abstract kind of like protest imagery. This is an upside down flag. This is a more detailed architectural kind of drawing. This is a sketch with, a boy looking at relics, abandoned like surveillance, a surveillance structure and rockets. This is a field with barbed wire. These are hands or fists up in the air. Again, the imagery from the tracing paper of the people farming, and then imagery of protest. And so I start by making those, making that kind of panel, and then also using carbon paper. And I transfer those onto the kind of paper here, and then I end up cutting out the imagery. And so the way that the border will be placed onto the wall is both hand drawing and then also stenciling. So this is kind of an image from the Photo League collection. And what else was I going to say? I guess that's it. So that was a lot of things to take in, I know, but I think I'm going to stop there.
I have a couple of questions coming in. First of all, I heard my audio was a little shaky. I had a couple of different comments. Is it okay now, Carolyn? Can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Somebody said, amazing presentation and art, and I agree. I'd like to start out by asking you a little bit about the scale at which you work, because the work that we have in our shows is huge work, and I see now that you also have sort of medium-sized works and more sort of intimate scale. So how do you, if you're working off of a small, if your original source is a photograph, how do you decide on the eventual scale? What is your process from that first image to your final product?
Mm-hmm. A lot of it is intuitive. I look at composition a lot, and so the way that that large scale of the family is created is that some of the techniques that I use is projection, tracing, erasure, of course, stenciling, and so I usually project the image onto the paper and trace them. So similar to that performance that I had shown images of at the Kentler, and with the wall drawing, I've done a few wall drawings in gallery spaces, and this is my first one at a museum, at the Columbus Museum. And so that I think happens both planned and then also just at the spot. And so I don't know, it's more about like, oh, this is going to look good at this size. Or like, for example, the 2x2 photos, they just make sense to be that size because that's kind of a instructed passport photo size. Yeah, and then also I think about like how the viewer interacts with the work, and so a lot of the figures that are cut out of the paper are, you know, looming, and you know, kind of you're both watching each other. So yeah, that's.
Yeah, I find your process being this dance between being um, methodical and yet sort of organic and spontaneous too. So do you
Mhm.
find that to be true?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Um, uh, Paulette asked, do you ever think
Maureen,
of, yes.
you just move your hand away from your head.
Oh, okay, yes.
you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Okay. Paulette asked, do you ever think of using your patterns particularly and moving to maybe like textile work?
Yes. I have kind of done that. So what I actually, that just reminded me, thanks for that question. That's a great question. You just reminded me, some of the patterns that I do use are, or the stencils that I do use are found objects in domestic spaces. So for example, this kind of, you can see it. This is kind of a dinner placemat, and it looks like an Islamikit pattern that I use on my wall drawings. And then this also is a radiator cover that I use often in my work, and they're just little triangles. And so I have, and it's taking, you know, that takes a very long time to cut up fabric, and I have done that before where I've used these stencils and cut that, you know, cut tiny triangles and glued them onto canvas. And mostly the textile work that I have done, usually it's collaged on and not sewn on, because I do, when I'm piecing together these drawings and imagery from family photos and mass media images and art historical reproductions, I'm essentially collaging, and so I'd like to take that into the textile work. So I have done that in actually recently, and I'd like to continue to do that, but right now I have to focus on this Columbus Museum show.
I had another question about your influences. You've talked a little bit about looking at Islamic art and architecture and miniature drawings.
Mhm.
Any sort of modern and contemporary artists that you've been looking to in your career so far?
Yeah, the contemporary artists that I look at are Zarina Hashmi. I was fortunate enough to know her and work with her, and so I really love the way that she works with paper and printmaking and repetition, and also like themes of the home. Another influence is, of course, Shazia Sikandar. She was the first Pakistani artist that I had seen enter the, I guess, quote unquote, mainstream. And so she's been a big influence on my work. I also love Wengeshi Mutu, who uses a lot of cut paper and collage and kind of grotesque figures in, you know, beautiful ways. And yeah, of course, Islamic art is a big influence, and I'm lucky to have been able to see a lot of the architecture in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, and also Spain, and also in the US. So yeah. Mhm.
Question from Lee. When you singled out the borders in your Islamic art as inspiration, they found themselves so curious by your interest in surveillance. And you talked about surveillance a little bit. It's surveillance and containment as it relates to those typically embellished Islamic art borders.
Mhm.
So does that sort of make sense to you? He was trying to make connection between the borders of those sort of Islamic art that you pointed out and
Mhm.
borders in general, so surveillance and on borders in general. Is there a connection between those two things for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I love that question because I do think about that a lot. I think about borders in the many different ways that they're defined. So in Islamic art, they contain and are geometric and repetitive. And one thinks that there's a formula that the geometry kind of follows. There are some geometric forms that are not so right or are not perfect and kind of merge out of the borders. And so I think about that in relationship to surveillance and how borders are both imaginary, but also they hurt people. So and they hurt people, and then there's a violence in those imaginary borders. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, I think you did. I think this is so much food for thought, right? Because it's both very beautiful, aesthetically beautiful, but also you touch upon some very serious and deep issues. I had a question about if you could embellish a little bit more on your blank faces and why you choose to always leave your portraits blank. You mentioned that a little bit. Is it sort of to take away an identity? Um, what is your thought process behind not giving any of your figures features, since you are so often taking them from photographs of real people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a question I get a lot, and every time I think I have the same answer. But every time I can't answer it either, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'll just point the camera to some other works. So these are images taken from images of my family, and so they are specific people. And so I think about these specific people, family members. This is on vellum, and so I think about how not only my family, how they're viewed, and then kind of like stereotype because of the way that they look. They have beards or they dress a certain way. That has been kind of stigmatized in media. This is a family hugging, so you don't see the faces. It's spray painted. This is another family. They don't have faces, and holding a family photograph, and also in the family photograph, there's no faces. So I think about how a lot of the even though I work with specific figures and names, how they're kind of condensed in a photograph, and they're stereotyped, or even mentioned this word before, but like modern day orientalized. And so I kind of use that as a technique and pull away from kind of erase the image. So just erase the eyes, nose, and mouth, and see what that does in terms of mirroring or reflection. And in terms of like how the viewer kind of has a conversation with this artwork. What does the viewer kind of put onto this work of a family gathering, possibly dressed in a certain way, and what kind of memories or experiences that kind of jogs in the viewers' experiences.
Yeah, I think that's, sorry, I'll move my hand away from the headphones. I think when you take away those conspicuous signs of, a particular culture or background, then suddenly the act of a family gathering together becomes universal act, right? It sort of connects to everyone in certain ways. I certainly found myself connecting to your work from my own personal background, and I can definitely see our viewers being able to connect to your background, to your art when they see your work in person. So I think this would be a good time to kind of end things out here. I was looking at the calendar and I realized that this is the week that Ginny and I were supposed to start installing for Women to Watch if it were to open in June, and makes me a little bit sad that we can't do that right now. The show is now slated to open on Thursday, October 8th, and we hope the world is in a place where you can all come see it in person. We'd like to thank the committees again for all your support, all your partnership and your assistance on this project, and your patience as we deal with these uncertain times. Thank you, Sadia, for speaking to us today. It was so wonderful to be able to walk around your studio with you. I know you kept mentioning the size, but you have done so much with that space. You have your little zen space, you have your creative space. It's wonderful to see. So thank you so much for letting us into your sort of creative space. So with that,
thank you for having me. Yeah, I always love sharing my work with others, even though I can't see you. I feel you.